We've all heard that physical security is important, right? Well, a lot of people don't get just how important it is. I'm going to show you how an entire Windows domain can be hacked in just a couple of minutes if you leave even a single server physically accessible. Then I'll show you how to prevent it, because realistically, somebody somewhere is going to have access to a server. Welcome back to the Pro Tech Show, the place for tech tips and advice for IT pros and decision makers. There's a saying that goes something along the lines of, if someone can get physical access to your computer, it's no longer your computer. I'm going to expand on that and say if someone can get physical access to one of your servers, it's no longer your business. I think people generally get this. Most server rooms have locks on the door. You can't just randomly wander into data centers. But despite this, there are often gaps, little chinks in the security that can be easily exploited. Here are some examples that I see fairly often. Non-IT staff who have access to a server room. This could be a cleaner, maybe it doubles as a storage room for secure documents. Maybe there are no on-site IT staff and somebody else has access to swap the backups or reboot the router. What about your remote sites? I'll often go to head office and they'll have a server room that looks like a bank vault. Then I ask them about that little office out in the middle of nowhere with like 5 people in it and they're, I don't know, do they have a server? Maybe just the one. Does it really matter for 5 people? Yes, that one server in that remote office in the middle of nowhere can backdoor your entire network in seconds. Or how about a rogue admin in your company? Or for that matter, let's say you use a highly secure colocation facility. What if there's a bad apple on their stuff? They have access to your servers, don't they? So, how big a deal is this really? I've put together a little Windows network to show you. It's a really simple one with 2 domain controllers. If you know anything about Windows networks, you'll know that the domain controller contains the crown jewels. It manages all of the user accounts and security on the network. Domain controllers operate on a multi-master model, with changes from one replicating out to all others. So if we can take control of a single domain controller, then we get everything. It's also a common physical vulnerability because you'll often deliberately locate domain controllers at remote locations in order to improve local performance. Let's see how easy it is to abuse one of these domain controllers without having any kind of login credentials. To do this, I'm going to use a very specialised tool. The Windows Install Media. You were expecting something more hacker, weren't you? There are more specialised tools, but I want you to see just how easy this is, so I'm going to use a Windows Setup Disk. Another reason to use a Windows Setup Disk is that if an administrator has enabled Secure Boot, then it isn't going to help because the Windows installer is signed and trusted. Here are 2 virtual machines that represent our network. I've logged into DC2 on the right. You can see there's nothing special here, it's just the default set of accounts you get after installing Active Directory. On the left we have the domain controller that we're going to pretend is physically unsecured. With this one I'm playing the attacker, so I don't have any account to log in with. But I have been able to walk up and insert the Windows Install Media, and I can press the power button to reboot it. OK, we've booted off the Windows Install Media. I'll select my language, click Repair Your Computer, Troubleshoot, Command Prompt, and here's where it gets interesting. With Windows itself offline, I can poke about in the hard drive here and there's no authentication to stop me. That in itself is quite dangerous, because I can steal the file that contains everyone's password hashes and start trying to crack them. If I've got that file, I can start the server back up as normal and crack the file somewhere else at my leisure. The administrators of this network wouldn't know anything other than a server rebooted unexpectedly. I'm going to do something even quicker than that though, something that will give me immediate access. The file utilman.exe is used to provide accessibility tools to help if you're visually impaired. I'm going to rename it. Then I'm going to make a copy of command.exe and call it utilman.exe. Command.exe is the command prompt that you're looking at here. Well, actually it's the shell behind it. Link up here and in the description if you want to learn the difference between terminals and shells. That's basically the network hacked. Let me show you what that simple change has done for us. Let's reboot the server back to Windows before someone comes to investigate. OK, here we are back at the logon screen. We still don't have a password though. Doesn't matter, we don't need one. You see this little icon in the bottom right? That's a button to open our accessibility options. That's a button that runs the file I replaced with a command prompt. Look what happens when I click it. Uh-oh, I shouldn't be able to use this without logging in now, should I? It's worse than that. Whose user account is it running as because nobody's actually logged in? That, my friends, is what I believe the kids are calling a big oof. This command prompt is running as the Windows system account. The Windows system account on a domain controller. On a running domain controller, that account has more access than any of the actual administrators on the network. I could use it to create a new user account with a terrible password. I can use it to add that account to a highly privileged security group. If I switch over to my other domain controller and refresh, you'll see that account has appeared in Active Directory. It is replicated across the network and it's a domain admin. If I close the command prompt, I can even log on to the domain controller with it. At this point, I own the network. If I control that system account, I can give myself permission to anything I want. Are you starting to worry about that site with 5 people out in the middle of nowhere yet? If that caught your attention, chuck me a like for the video and leave a message in the comments. If you're convinced all of your domain controllers are physically secured, here are a few more things to worry about. On a typical business network, servers are often virtualized. In the demo I gave you, I wasn't plugging physical media into a server, I was connecting virtual media to a virtual server. I did that because it's faster and easier for me to show you and record it without using a capture card, but that's also how most actual servers are configured. Most don't have a physical console because they're virtual. This means you have to consider the security of the hypervisor, because if that can be breached, then it is the equivalent of getting physical access to the domain controller, and you can do what I just did. The same goes for any underlying storage such as the SAN. If you can access the storage, you can do the same thing. If you do have a physical server, whether that be the domain controller itself or the hypervisor that hosts it, don't forget about remote access tools. A lot of servers have lights out management devices such as an ILO or an iDRAC that can be used to access the physical console of the server remotely. This is particularly useful for those remote sites in the middle of nowhere, so IT staff don't need to attend site if there's a problem. If the security on those devices isn't up to scratch, then an attacker can do the same thing I just did from anywhere on the network. Finally, it's not just about domain controllers. If I can log on to a member server using the same technique, it's only a matter of time before I can escalate my privileges. All I have to do is to break something and then wait for an admin to log on to fix it and dump their password from memory. It doesn't even need to be a server, I could start the same process from a laptop. It might just take a few more extra hops to get all the way up to domain admin. So okay, I've got you worried. I'm not going to leave you there. Here are a few ways to protect yourself. Firstly, the obvious one. Do a physical security audit and make sure physical access to servers is properly controlled. Make sure you've secured not just your servers, but anything that can be used to access your servers. This includes hypervisors, storage, and remote access tools. Another thing you can do is treat your server like a laptop. Let me show you. I'm going to try the same trick I used against DC1, but this time against DC2. Boot to the Windows setup, click my way to the command prompt and... oh, that's different. I'll skip that and try to access the C drive. No luck. What I've done here is I've enabled BitLocker and encrypted the server's hard drive. This is something you probably do with laptops to protect their data in case they get stolen. If you don't, you really should. People rarely do this with servers because they're a lot more difficult to just slip in your backpack and walk off with, but it is a very effective way to block this sort of attack. If they can't decrypt the hard drive, they can't manipulate it or steal any password files. If you have servers in locations where you cannot rely on adequate physical security, then encrypting them is quite a sensible idea. Word to the wise though, if you're doing this at one of those remote sites, then make sure you've got some kind of remote console access in place. A Dell iDRAC, HP ILO, even an IP KVM. Just something that lets you access the console before Windows boots. At some point that server is going to stop during power up and ask for a recovery key to continue. When it happens, you'll be much happier if you can send the keystrokes over the network instead of having to jump in a car and drive 6 hours just to type in a code and then come back again. Another thing you can do with remote sites is to deploy read-only domain controllers. These are domain controllers, but more limited. They can process some requests locally and pass the rest on to full-fat domain controllers elsewhere. If you have a site with 5 people, you could configure a read-only domain controller to only cache the passwords of those 5 people. That way, if it gets breached and the password stolen, the impact is limited to those 5 people instead of the entire business. The other way they protect you is that, as the name suggests, they're read-only. They can replicate updates from other full-fat domain controllers, but they can't push out their own updates. If I tried to create myself an admin user account after hacking a read-only domain controller, it won't go anywhere. By the way, it's not either or, you can do both. If you bitlock a read-only domain controller, then it protects even those 5 local accounts from offline attack. If on the other hand an online attack succeeds over the network, maybe by exploiting an unpatched vulnerability, it being read-only will still help limit the damage. The final thing you can do about this sort of shenanigans is monitoring. If random accounts start appearing and then getting added to the domain admins group, I bet you'd like to know about it, wouldn't you? When it's all said and done, no defense is impenetrable, so you need to stay vigilant. Assume breach is the mindset. If you always act under the assumption that you've already been breached, then the focus becomes detection. Should the unfortunate happen, you'll then be in a much better place to detect it quickly and shut it down, limiting the damage. Alright, this has been a relatively short one, I think. I don't really know, I'll find out when I edit it, but it feels shorter than usual. If you found this useful, then hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and have a look over here to see if any of these videos look interesting as well. It's been great having you, thanks for watching, see you next time.